once again. The thought is too dreadful. Life would be unbearable without Deborah. I ran Deborah and told her of the threat. I wish I could die. That is not an idle or temporary impulse. I have decided over the last 2 or 3 weeks that it would be the best thing that could happen altogether, and the thought of death is not fearsome. Let's remember that Deborah is the name of the alter ego of Juliet in the kingdom of Borovnia. So she's going to refer to Juliet as Deborah in her diaries from now on. It's on February the 13th of 1954 that Pauline starts writing about the idea that if her mother were dead, and her father as well, things would be way easier to her. Quote, "She is most unreasonable. I also overheard her making insulting remarks about Mrs. Hume while I was ringing this afternoon. I am very glad because the Humes sympathize with me. It's nice to feel that adults realize what mother is. Dr. Hume is going to do something about it, I think. Why could not mother die? Thousands of people are dying all the time. Thousands. So why not mother and father too? Life is very hard." Close quote. So it's really sad because in reality, Pauline used to idealize the Huns, but they were very much worried, the same way as her parents were, about their relationship. But because of whatever social reason, they would be polite and kind to her. And it was, of course, probably because Pauline's father was busy in his business that her mother was the one to be there, disciplining her and forbidding her to see Juliet unless she would put out some weight. So on February is when the girls start coming up with a new plan. And the plan was basically to go to Hollywood to become starlets and to sell the rights of the story of the Kingdom of Borovnia, to the Hollywood,
production houses, movie studios.
Exactly. And because famous and to be recognized by everybody, to get their geniuses recognized, because they really believe they were geniuses. It's on February that they decide that they were going to start saving money for that Hollywood trip. On the 23rd of April of 1954 is which Pauline writes that Deborah has rung her and told her that she found her mother, Mrs. Hilda Hume, in bed drinking tea, which is hilarious, with another man, Walter Berry, whom was a former client of Hilda Hume because she was a marriage counselor. And this man was spending time in the Hume's family because he had fallen sick. They had offered him a place to stay. So what Hilda told her daughters, she and Walter Perry and her husband were living as a threesome.
Or a semi-open relationship.
Fast forward a couple of months, we would know that the Humes were going to get a divorce. And there's another very important fact that Mr. Hume was fired in his position as a rector of the Canterbury University. And their plans were for him to take Jonathan, his youngest son, with him to England, and that they would send Juliet to South Africa to live with one of her aunts. On the 24th of April of 1954, Pauline wrote, quote, "Such a huge amount has happened that we do not know where we are. Dr. Hume is the noblest and most wonderful person I have ever known of. But one thing, Deborah and I are sticking to through everything. We sink or swim together." On late April, Pauline writes once again about her plans, or more like her suicidal thoughts, and then she starts to flirt with the idea of getting rid of what she thinks is the obstacle of all her plan, Juliet and her plans, which is her mother. On April the 13th, Pauline wrote, quote, I told Deborah of my intentions, and she is rather worried, but does not disagree violently. End of quote. According to the diaries and what their parents would say, the girls would spend the night out playing in the backyards or just writing and telling each other stories. And on June the 6th of 1954, Pauline wrote, quote, we went to sleep at 4:30 tomorrow morning after talking all night. We were discussing at first how we sometimes had a strange feeling that we had done what we were doing before. We realized why this was, and why Deborah and I have such extraordinary telepathy, and why people treat us and look at us the way they do, and why we behave as we do. It is because we are mad. We are both stark, staring, raving mad. There is definitely no doubt about it, and we are thrilled by the thought. So the girls came so far that not only they had the kingdom of Borovnia and the Fourth War, but they have also rejected Catholicism, and they had made their own religion, which consisted on saints and gods that were all the best-known actors of the era. That when we were watching the movie Heavenly Creatures, like the main one was the Italian opera singer Mario Lanza. And on June the 11th of 1954, Pauline would write that they went to the cinema and then they went back to either Juliet or Pauline's house, and that the both girls reenact the way that the saints, that their favorite actors, would make love, which can lead us to the idea that the girls had sex. Or what do you think about that?
Well,
Chris?
we're engaging in a form of sexual activity, regardless of whether they considered it romantic or not.
On the 19th of June of 1954, Pauline wrote, quote, practically finished our books today, and our main idea for the day was to mother. This notion is not a new one, but this time it is a definite plan which we intend to carry out. We have worked it out carefully and are both thrilled by the idea. Naturally, we feel a trifle nervous, but the pleasure of anticipation is great. End of quote. So at this time, 3 days before the proper murder, Pauline was writing in her diary that she was going to murder her mother, Honora. Well, that's a pretty much good indicative that it was a premeditated murder. Very much.
And the fact that 3 days ahead, she's already fantasizing about the ecstasy of committing the act. It's fairly exemplary of premeditation.
Incriminating,
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
The 21st of June, Pauline wrote, quote, I rose late and helped Mother vigorously this morning. Deborah rang and we decided to use a rock in a stocking rather than a sandbank. We discussed the moither fully. I feel very keyed up, as thought I were planning a surprise party. Mother has fallen in with everything beautifully, and the happy event is to take place tomorrow afternoon. So next time I write this in this diary, Mother will be dead. How odd, yet how pleasing. End of quote.
It was also the 21st that the girls decided on the weapon they would use to dispatch Pauline's mother, and each of them provided a component. Pauline provided the stocking, and Juliet provided a half piece of brick that would act as the weight in the bludgeoning weapon.
So on the 22nd of June of 1954, which was the day of the murder, Pauline wrote early on that morning. She entitled that piece of the diary as, quote, the day of the happy event. And she wrote, I am writing a little of this up in the morning before the death. I feel very excited and the night before Christmas-ish last night. I did not have pleasant dreams, though I am about to rise. So literally maybe minutes before she left home. They did was a meeting with Juliet, and they went to a tea room in Victoria Park, in which they had tea with Honora, and after that they went for a little walk. According to what they said afterwards when they were interrogated by the police, Juliet had a small ring, like with a fantasy fake...
Like a piece of theatrical jewelry with a large glass jewel.
And Juliet would drop it, like she would have dropped it in the ground. She would have called Honora's attention on the piece of glass or rock on the floor, and that's when Pauline struck her in the head multiple times with the brick.
The theory was that it would only take one or two good thumps with the brick in the stocking, just like in the movies. However, the reality of this was quite different, as the girls found out.
It was a very brutal and violent attack, according to the autopsy later on done on Honora. She had approximately 45 wounds, and she was basically unrecognizable. Is that the word?
Yep, unrecognizable by the end.
And even her denture fell out of her mouth.
It was beaten out of her mouth, I think, with several bludgeon attacks. Defensive wounds on her hands as well.
I think they also blew out of the tip of one of her pinky fingers, which would be like a defensive move, like putting your hands in your face or your head to prevent any attack. And after that, the girls ran hysterically back to the tea room when they had been drinking tea before, and Pauline was said to be screaming, "Help, Mommy has been seriously injured, she's dead." And they were covered in blood and mud. So we have a lot to unfold this, don't we, Chris?
And we do indeed, very much. Where do we begin?
Should we go back then? Should we proceed to the judge, or can we make a bit of speculation on what the girls were thinking about that time?
Well, we should probably look at what the girls were thinking, and what drove them to make the choice they did in the end.
So how was Christchurch at that time?
Well, Christchurch in the 1950s was somewhat of a boom town. It acted as the economic centre of the South Island of New Zealand, and with a massive hinterland of agricultural cropping like wheat, barley, sheep, and plenty of other agricultural products, which were primarily being sent to the rebuilding nation of United Kingdom after World War II. There was no shortage of work available, and the town of, the city of the city of Christchurch was New Zealand's second largest city after Auckland, and at the time this prosperity drew a lot of people to the area, and it saw its role in the Commonwealth as being a steadfast ally of England, and a lot of New Zealanders considered themselves loyal subjects of the Crown and of the Queen, and they would do everything in their power to uphold the values and the etiquette and social mores of England. As such, a lot of the strains and stresses of social life were dictated by what would be considered proper English values and morals.
People would say that Christchurch was